Ghostbusters is actually more family friendly than you're probably thinking. I took my 3 kids to see it, and they're aged 9, 8 and 4, and all of them really enjoyed the film. None of them said it was particularly scary. The kind of creepiest comment I got was that my 9-year-old daughter said it creeped her out a little bit. She didn't like the idea of haunted houses and you know, the subway kind of being visited by ghouls and those kind of things. She didn't like the thought of it, but what she saw on screen, she said, didn't really bother her. It didn't scare her. So, I mean, that's my kids. Your kids might feel a bit differently. So let me describe what you will see if you're thinking about taking your kids along to see this film. So the ghosts are very obviously CGI. There really is a lot of effort has been made here to make it look like it isn't real. So they aren't scary, they aren't overly over the top, even sort of spooky. They're just, you know, kind of elaborate special effects. They're quite stunning actually, and they're quite beautiful, but I wouldn't say they're scary. The scariest moment for my middle child was in one of the opening scenes, which is actually in the trailer, of where this ghostly female character vomits goo out of her mouth, and it's quite, you know, quite gross, and one of the characters, one of our Ghostbusters, gets covered in slime. This was the only scene in the film where he felt he kind of had to look away because he wasn't sure. He thought that she was going to attack, but when she didn't, he was like, oh, she just spewed on them. Okay, that's kind of cool. So there's a little bit of grossness in it rather than anything scary. So talking about, I guess, the violence, if you like, in the film, most of it is very comic book and very signposted as well. So you know it's coming. There aren't those kind of loud, jumpy moments where you jump out of your seat, and you don't see anything particularly gruesome. In fact, I wouldn't say there's any gore in this film whatsoever. The most gory thing is just seeing people covered with slime. And who doesn't think that's funny? What? You don't? Really? Anyway, so the one scene of, I guess, violence, the most violent thing, and again, it kind of happens in a way that if you don't really know what's going on, it's not entirely explained, although it is mentioned later. One character commits suicide. So this character does this by electrocution. They hold on to highly charged machinery and it kills them. At the time, it isn't implicitly stated that they have just killed themselves, if you like, and they appear later on in the film. So, well, kind of in another form. Oh, is that confusing? Yeah, it is, sorry. So while we are talking about suicide here, I don't want you to think that there is anything particularly graphic that you see. And later on, a character mentions that this person had killed themselves. So that probably is the biggest thing that I would want to point out in the film in terms of violence or anything related to a violent nature. Everything else is like comic book stuff. So people being thrown through the air or catapulted, being throat grabbed and dangled out of a window or thrown through a window. And again, you don't see any injuries as a result of this. So there is a very clear understanding that no one really gets hurt, everyone bounces back, and it's all just fun and games. Any risk or tension seems very low. Even when the whole city seems to be under siege by ghosts and ghouls, you really don't get that sense that anything bad's going to happen. It's quite easy and quite sort of gently delivered. So I think that's probably it about the violence that I can really go into. As I said, very comic book, very slapstick, and I don't think there's too much to worry about there. Sex and nudity, there isn't any at all during the film. There's a couple of references to sex and nudity, mostly in flirtation. One woman flirts with this male character. I can't remember his name. He's kind of good looking. Oh, Chris somebody? Oh, I don't know. He's some guy. No, totally forgettable. Anyway, so she flirts a little bit with him, and so there's a little bit of innuendo with that. But again, it's nothing particularly graphic or even really memorable. I know the word strippogram gets mentioned once, virginity is mentioned, and a stripper pole is mentioned, but these are kind of throwaway lines for jokes. There isn't any, you don't see any of this sort of stuff. Alcohol is a little bit similar, and drugs. There are some scenes where you see wine and beer on tables, but you don't really see anybody drinking, and you see some beer and spirits advertisements on above subways. Also, there's a couple of mentions. There's a mention of AA, and there's a mention of being drunk, and there's a couple of mentions of drugs. So one character says, "Am I on crack?" and And another line is something about terrorists on hallucinogens or something. So there's references to drugs there, but you don't see any drug taking happen. The other thing we want to talk about is language. And again, there's really not a lot of bad language in the film. So the S word is used once, A word I think is used maybe 3 times. There's bitch, and there's a few kind of slang words, but again, nothing particularly offensive there either. So overall, it's fairly family friendly. As I said, it's not particularly scary. If your child or if you have already seen the original Ghostbusters film, then I found that far more tense and far more scary, and it got under your skin more than this one does. This one really does set out to be entertaining and funny and lighthearted. It is also quite clever. There's some very clever references, and fans of the first film will love all of the cameos in the film. Watch out for some kind of slightly cryptic ones and some very cryptic lines which appear in the film as references to the first film. They really are quite fan pleasing. So it's very entertaining, it's very funny. Have they done a good job? Well, personally, I don't think a remake was particularly necessary, but here it is fun. So if you're going to go in with an open mind and really enjoy it. But before I go, I do want to mention there are a few scenes at the end that you must stick around for. So there's quite a bit of vision under the end credits, so make sure you stick around and watch all of that. And there is an end credits scene. So at the very end of the credits, there is a post-credits scene that you must stick around for, particularly if you're a fan of the first film. So if you do go and see Ghostbusters, please let me know what you think, particularly if you take children. I really want to hear what children think about this film. There's a little bit more detail as usual on the website, which is cinemum.net. But before you go, please just take a moment and subscribe.